please welcome Atlas Network board member and president and CEO of Donors Trust, Lawson Bader.
Normally I get the Darth Vader theme song when that's announced, so appreciate the claps. Well, welcome everybody to the State of the Freedom Movement lunch. I hope you have enjoyed the day's programming. I hope you enjoyed the Liggio lecture by our friend Gabriel Calzada. Before we start our program, I do want to draw your attention to a few things. There's a flyer at your table concerning a book that Atlas Network will be publishing soon called New Ideas in the Old Ones. And it includes the first 10 years of the Liggio lecture program from, actually, does anybody want to remember who the first one was and what year? I just gave away the 10 years bit, so anybody? All right, Jim Otteson, looks like no one remembers. Jim Otteson, 2013, all the way to Gabrielle this morning. The book is really a reminder of what our cause is, about the enduring principles, about the humble pursuit of truth. I think the important word there is humble. And while the late Leonard Liggio would be proud of how all of Atlas Network's partners continue to adapt their strategies to the changes in the various markets and the marketplace of ideas, he would want us to see, again, to be underlined and again to be underlined, that the foundation of what we do, the foundation of this movement, is really a commitment to truth. As my friend Tony Woodleaf used to say, we always want to be on the side of truth, not have just truth on our side. We're not into partisan politics. We're not about a Twitter war. I really wouldn't want to do that. But scholarly rigor, which is at its core. And so the lectures that the book will be creating and putting together is really a wonderful example of what is best about our movement, reminders of the virtues that Leonard embodied and which we would all be very well advised to emulate. Now, the flyer has a QR code because all things are technologically savvy these days. How you can pre-order copies, emphasize the word pre-order. This is capitalism, yes, get it. We will also send, in the case of non-capitalism, a free copy to all donors in the Atlas Network, which is also a good reason why you should join the donor community. So it's not really a free book, you're paying for it in another way, because it is important to remind all of us that what we do with other people's money. So it's important for us to all be part of that. Now, the central goal of today's lunch is to reflect on what you are all a part of, the ambitious global effort to sort of unleash individual ingenuity into rich humanity. And so we use this phrase, freedom movement, which is a peculiar phrase. It's sort of shorthand for what we mean are all these organizations that the Atlas Network works with and is privileged to serve, as well as the many kindred spirits, or at least some of the kindred spirits we find on college campuses and academia and media, but also the activist circles and philanthropic world that we operate in. And it's a movement that benefits from this great diversity and is very decentralized in nature, which is the core of why we do what we do. And so all the organizations that you see at Atlas do operate independent from one another, but they also pursue their own vision for how to advance the principles of a free society in local context. Now, one more thing before we bring up our group to have a discussion. I have a few more things to say about Atlas. There's a phrase that there's no free lunch. And the reality is, we have a very sophisticated movement. We may have the best speakers. We may use technology effectively. We may understand how to communicate and be passionate, but if we don't have good food, the freedom movement's probably doomed. So, in order to advance that, there is now a new cookbook that the Atlas Network has produced called The Tastes of the Atlas Network. So it'll allow us to add one more feather to our quill of feathers to be able to adapt and cajole by making sure we know how to feed people well. And it has recipes from some of our favorite groups throughout all the regions, QR codes to order the book, QR codes to learn more about them. I did notice that a couple of the recipes do take approximately 2.5, 3 hours to cook. So it becomes an opportunity to bring people to the table and to enjoy the conversation about what we do. So there's a QR code as well, I think, on your table about how to get a copy of the book. Let's now share some sort of big picture numbers about the Atlas Network and what's happening. I think it's a slide that'll probably be popping up momentarily. If not, I'll just go ahead and say what they are. The Atlas Network currently has 556 partners in 101 countries. That's worth celebrating. Now, the distribution among those countries is as follows. In Africa, which does include the Middle East and North Africa, we have 57 organizations. In Asia, which includes, clap, that's fine. Everybody's going to have their parochial interests here. I get it. In Asia, which includes Oceania, we have 54. Europe, 146. In Latin America, 115. And in the U.S. and Canada, 184. Now, here's the growth of these partners, at least in the last 3 or 4 years. 484 organizations in 91 countries a couple years ago to now 556 in 101, a 13% net growth just in the last 3 years. So kudos to all of you who are very involved in what that is happening there. Now, budgets, I know people pay attention to. The total budgets of all the groups partnering with the Atlas Network is more than $500 million now. Real money. Of course, as Lyle reminded me, the 80-20 rule is very much in effect in this, so you've got averages pulled up by groups at the top of the budget size compared to the bottom. So the median organization in our network has a budget of less than $230,000 with 4 full-time team members. It is fantastic and wonderful to see the impact being generated by all these groups in all these countries, big and small, within our network. Now, the Atlas Network strategy, which I think you've all become familiar with, the coach, compete, and celebrate model. The coach, what does that mean? Well, it's the activities we see through the Atlas Network Academy. Our compete activities, like, frankly, the grant competitions that are offered thanks to the donors that are able to provide that. The celebrate bit, which is this conference the last couple days, the regional forums that you'll be hearing about later, where we award prizes that put a very fine point on what excellence looks like when we're trying to advance freedom, with the hope, of course, that your ambitions go up just a couple notches when you see what others in the freedom movement are doing, because competition is a lovely, lovely concept. I'm actually selfishly glad that Atlas did not add a P like promote or print, because CCCP would have been a really uncomfortable acronym to utilize for Atlas, and that might have been a slight board conversation to have. Anyway, a few years ago, we began to roll out a series of sort of regional centers, right, to lean into the particular challenges that various geographical regions gave us, and to see how we could add value to the partner community to create more opportunities for collaboration. So what we want to do now is bring out the heads of those, or those who've been involved in creating these centers, so we can have a conversation about that. So let me just invite out to the stage. We'll begin with our Center for Latin America, directed by Roberto Salinas Leon. Roberto, come on out. Followed by Magat Wade with the Center for African Prosperity. Last year we announced, there we go, as our own Tom Palmer was relocating to Thailand, that he would take on a leadership role building out the Center for Asia and Oceania. So Tom, why don't you come on out? And then just yesterday, I believe, we announced the launch of the Center for Europe with the help of my fellow Atlas Network board member Jean-Claude Griffat and Adam Bartha. Adam, as you know, is the head of the Epicenter and is very helpful in helping to sort of prepare this launch. And then lastly, not because we're in America, but we launched our Center for the U.S. and Canada with the help of John Tillman and Niels Veldhuis, and now directed by Atlas Network Chief Operating Officer Lyle Swim. So Lyle, come on out. And I noticed Roberto took my seat, but that's okay because we're just going to wing it. So, you know, I can make comments, but we're not going to worry about it. Nobody puts baby in the corner. So let's, first of all, welcome. Glad to have you here. Let's start out by asking sort of each of you to give us an example of an Atlas Network partner in your region that frankly has just impressed you for the last year. So Roberto, you're in that seat, so why don't you go ahead and start?
My apologies first. Actually, I want to name a very important and special initiative that was launched on the spot 3 weeks before the now famous referendum took place in Chile, we were able to organize emergency funding for 3 institutes. Libertad y Desarrollo. Bettina Horst is here with us today. Fundación para el Progreso. We have many representatives. And Fundación Piensa, along with many other of the Chileans that are attending Liberty, Forum, and Freedom dinner on this occasion. And it was not just thanks to that, but we think that we had a part to play in a vote that was a vote instead of the woke politics and the horrendous constitutional proposal that had been launched by the Boric administration in Chile, that a vote for common sense ensued. And 65, almost 2/3 of the population in the referendum voted no to the... And that in Latin America, so far, among the great projects that we've launched, that's what's most impressed me.
All right. Magat, let's go to you.
I guess I wanted to do a joke, so I'm going to do it.
Will it be funny?
Can you guys hear me? Do you see my microphone is working? Because we were trying to figure it out on the back end. But anyway, my joke failed. Whatever. You guys are not fun. Ours goes to the Center for Development and Enterprises Great Lake, Burundi. You heard Emab yesterday speak, so check this out. With $30,000, so 3-0, they did the White Women Project. Because what you guys don't know is that in Burundi, before these guys did this, there was a real inequality before the law for women, especially when it comes to inheritance. So in order to mobilize public opinion and the parliamentary support for the passage of a new law, these guys went to work. I will spare you the numbers because they've done a lot of work, reached out to a lot of people, but check out the results. First result, the government passed a land code reform securing access of wives to land titles. That's cool. Second, the government passed a personal, yes, you should. Second, the government passed a personal and family code reform recognizing the right to manage, recognizing the existence of women in the management of land. Before that, women did not have a right to manage income from the land. Now, they may feel free to cultivate and sell the product of their labor. Number 2. Finally, but not least, they decentralized the inheritance settlement disputes, which prioritizes equality before the law among men and women in Burundi. Previously, only the Minister of Justice was the sole responsible one for making such settlements. All of this happened, real stuff, for real people, with $30,000.
Tom.
Yeah, it's a big region, Asia and Oceania, so that's 4.75 billion people. You could put a couple of Europes into one of the countries in Asia.
You got a lot of water, too.
But I think about 2 really impressive and outstanding examples. So our partner, Foundation for Economic Freedom in Philippines, building on previous successes, they passed the Commonwealth Act 146, opening up public services to private investment and competition. This has a massive impact on telecommunications, on transportation and other areas, with knock-on effects, lowering the prices of food, lowering the prices of transport, making education easier. It's a huge win. And then Sri Lanka. Our partners rose to the challenge of this meltdown caused by the Sri Lankan government. They did the Reset Sri Lanka program, and they are setting the agenda for the country. So this is just astonishingly good work. We should be very proud of our partners.
Excellent, excellent. All right, let's fly above some water and go to Europe. Madam.
It's a difficult question, to be fair, because it's always a perennial question in our movement, how we measure impact. And a lot of people say we should be measuring impact through the number of website hits, through social media hits, through the number of legislations that we have managed to change. I would suggest that we should be introducing a new metric, the number of corrupt politicians who try to bribe you in order to shut up about your research and stop criticizing them. And on that front, IES Europe in Romania has done amazingly because they have done a great research about how governments are responsible for the rising cost of living, and this is exactly what happened. And it happened because they were super successful on the mainstream media campaigning against increased taxation and increased red tape that increases the cost of living. And essentially, they tried to approach IES Romania or IES Europe in Romania and stop their great campaigns. But being Eastern European, I have to add a second group of individuals because Lawson, you asked what group impressed us the most. And I have to say our Ukrainian friends who have been fighting an ongoing battle both at the Eastern Front and in the hearts and minds of the people, trying to change Ukraine into a more liberal, more prosperous place, simultaneously fighting a war against Russian aggression with the help of the Atlas Network and all the donors that donated more than $2 million that were distributed across 10 organizations through 50 different grants. I think what our Ukrainian friends are doing is truly heroic, and they should increase, or they should really, really be appreciated by our fantastic movement.
Hear, hear. And rounding out the continents, we'll go to North America with you.
Well, we have simple stuff in the U.S. compared. Sometimes feel a little guilty, but no, important work here. Obviously, if America loses the light that it shed, there's problems for the rest of the world. So the one that stuck out to me was the Pelican Institute. This is one that we actually highlighted last year. They won our $100,000 U.S. Investor Summit to do some work. And I think there were a couple things that to me really impressed it. Number one, it was a really holistic approach. So there were 3 specific bills that they looked at to really change the dynamic around work. So one was this right to work, to really enshrine, not that we have to get permission for the government to be productive, we have a right to be productive and to earn a living. Number 2, they looked at the criminal justice system, because one of the places where governments get in the way is enabling those who have been incarcerated for whatever reason to get a second chance, and they deserve that. So working on the fair chance law, and then also licensure transparency. I mean, one of the great bureaucracies in the U.S., I think it's now almost 30% of all U.S. professions require licenses. That was somewhere around 5 or 6% back in the 40s. So there's been a massive growth in bureaucracy and a massive obstacle in terms of working. And they did all this. The other part to me, so the holistic, the second part of that is that they really did it in a bipartisan way. So they had a Democratic governor and they had a Republican House Senate. And they got both of those to agree on those bills. So I think it's a tremendous example that we're about policy and principle and not party and politics. And I think it's a great example for all of us.
So, hear, hear. So when we have a conversation about top performers, what I hope is that many of you in the room think, well, how do I become a top performer? Well, I have a plug for you. The reality is you can, because one day you too can be mentioned by Magat Wade at a lunch, which would be very, very important. So Atlas has this thing called the Atlas Network Academy. And that is an incredibly useful tool to sort of help develop an organization's skill, think strategically. They have a certification process. You have a special website, isn't it? Not AA, that would be a really bad message. Yeah. ANA, yes, it's an airline. At atlasnetwork.org. I would check that out. And what I oftentimes hear is, well, Atlas never invites me to be part of this. Well, put on your big boy and big girl pants and get yourself involved and apply. Because if you don't actually try to apply, then you're not going to get a lot of help. So the lecture is, that's an opportunity for us to develop this idea of becoming a top performer. It's not just about the competition. It's well beyond that. It's about how we can actually be much more effective individually as a unit and largely in the bigger group. So check that out if you're not. There's also a session this afternoon at 3:15 on habits of highly successful think tanks. So if you've not had a chance to go to an early one, please do that. So let's take a few minutes with what we have and move beyond simply a top performer to talk what really can be hard, which are the challenges. Because at the end of the day, we're not just about teaching the ideas of a free society. We're trying to apply them to circumstances that are changing, that may, in the case of Europe, involve a war that wasn't there a couple years ago. So let's sort of talk about each of your respective regions and what you see as one or two of the challenges. And let's sort of start there. And Roberto, since you're there, let's just go with you again. What are some particular challenges that you're finding that need to be addressed in your area?
Well, it being also a very large area, and not as large as Asia, and not necessarily homogenous, but one thing in common in the Latin America region in the past, especially in the past 3 years, has been what Tom himself has called this rising wave of illiberal populism. And this illiberalism has many features. And I think one of the great lessons of 2022 and looking forward is that we have to learn how to address the issue of what Moises Naim has called post-truth. In other words, these lies that are fabricated by populists, by autocrats, and the narratives that do not correspond to reality but are there simply to sell the possibility of cementing power. And so how that's not left or right or center, it's just that thirst for power, what in Latin America we call caudillismo. So I think the greatest challenge today remains how to combat that caudillismo. New stories, new narratives, new policy proposals, and new commitments, especially with the young voices of liberty, new commitments to the ideas of freedom.
All right. Magat.
I think we really don't. One of the things I notice is that in Africa, and yes, it's a big continent, 54 countries, 55 depending on how you count, I'm fortunate to say that we don't really have a problem that I see happening in most Latin America with what you just explained. I feel like our people, they're more clueless about the free market when they're against, the concept of capitalism or such, if there is a problem. And so in our case, I feel like for us, the biggest challenge is that the freedom movement is still very nascent for the most part. Our partners are younger, than maybe in others, so we don't have the legacy groups or think tanks but other regions have, except maybe in South Africa. But it is an opportunity, because you have all of these young people that are super motivated. When they hear about these ideas, it's almost like the light came on. I know it's for me, that's how it works. And so our biggest problem is, I guess, at this point, underfunding. But the big opportunity is your money goes so far working with our partners. So that's pretty much our biggest problem. I don't see it as a problem because it's easy to fix, right? Underfunding, give money, they do the work, right?
So Tom, I do feel the Oceania, again, a big area, but is there anything that's particularly uniquely challenging now that we should be addressing?
Well, one is, remember, it's such a huge area, and unlike, say, most of Latin America, there's Portuguese and Spanish, which is a dialect of Portuguese, but they can communicate amongst each other fairly easily across the continent, and that's not generally the case across Asia. You have such a diversity of cultures, civilizations, and languages. But one thing with Dhananath Fernando, who's joined us with the Center for Asia and Oceania, he's one of the geniuses behind the Sri Lanka Advocata project. He's working to improve research skills to give voice to the marginalized and the excluded. This is very important for our movement. We're not just here, as we're often portrayed, somehow the fat cats and the rich. We want an inclusive society, an inclusive economy, opportunity for everybody. And that means finding out how to get out of our bubbles and go talk to people in villages, people who suffer daily humiliation from the state, and give voice to them and bring that into the political and policy dialogue. The other thing is democratic resilience. The CCP, not a big surprise, is not a big fan of democratic governance. And there is a move across Europe to undermine democracy. And it's very important to help our friends to strengthen the democratic systems there, to resist restrictions on speech, We're seeing more governments saying we're going to restrict the internet and censor and ban and so on. And our partners are pushing back against this, because this needs to be a concerted defense of liberal democracy.
Adam.
Well, in Europe, as surprising as it is, we are very much concerned about the cost of living crisis, which has been an ongoing problem across the world, whether people can afford food or whether people can afford electricity and heating in their homes. But that discussion arrived to Europe partially thanks to the Russian aggression, but partially thanks to our own policies that really harm the poorest segments of our own society. So a lot of the Atlas partners in 2023 will be working on how to reduce the cost of living crisis on our own citizens through tax and regulatory reforms. Just to give you a couple of examples, energy policy is obviously a big discussion right now. Europe is being blackmailed by Russia through gas. But over the last 10 years or so, we have made conscious political choices to rely on a foreign aggressive power for our own energy production. A lot of European countries, including Germany, France, and the UK, banned fracking. So what has been a massive success story here in the United States to extract shale gas and provide electricity and heat through that is banned in a lot of European countries. That's a choice by governments. It's a choice that we are winding down nuclear power. It's a choice that we are banning onshore wind farms. So all of these issues that make the cost of living crisis a lot worse needs to be addressed. And Magat mentioned some of the issues of poverty in Africa that we Europeans are impacting and making worse, and we're making it worse for ourselves and our own citizens when it comes to trade barriers and trade relations. So one way to elevate to the pressures on our own citizens would be to endorse free trade, especially when it comes to food production. We are harming the producers in Africa because we are introducing quotas. We're not letting them export their goods to European nations. And I think in 2023, with inflation being above 20%, with food inflation being above 80%, in some EU member states, we really, really need to take the message to policymakers that they can make a difference and help with the cost of living crisis because it's in their power.
Lyle, problems.
Problems. So I guess with the problem, the way I look at it, there's an opportunity on the other side of that, right? So I think as we look at in the U.S., two issues: one, healthcare; the other one, education. And part of this also, to Adam's point with inflation, but the continual rise in cost and affordability. I think it's opened some opportunities. Even with COVID, we had really a market example of getting a vaccine to market very quickly if we remove those barriers and we allow people to, innovate. So I think there's an opportunity there and window. I think what has been the challenge in the past and now is the opportunity because of what happened with COVID and the veil got pulled back and everybody saw the wizard behind the curtain and he wasn't much of a wizard at all. In terms of education, I think I don't know how, this is the challenge, I don't know how long the window of reform will be for us to really push the envelope when it comes to education reform. There's energy right now, there's momentum right now. Who knows how long it will be before there kind of comes that pushback. So for me, the challenge is how do we, in a really strategic and thoughtful way across the United States, from K-12 through higher ed, push for some significant reforms, changes in structures to funding, that it goes to parents versus to bureaucrats. I think if we can really make some headway there, I think it sets us up for the next 25, 30 years to really change the landscape of America toward more pro-freedom.
So let me ask you a collective question, and not everybody has to answer. Do you feel, while we continue to grow in this network, we continue to become more sophisticated, and we will always strive for that, and we'll ideally achieve that, as some of these problems develop, some are unique to circumstance, some are unique to a time in history, some are a little more evergreen. And to what extent do you feel within your respective region, are we better equipped to deal with the evergreen? Are we better equipped to deal with the sudden opportunity? does it matter? I sort of posed that to the group, just out of morbid curiosity. Yeah, anybody can answer before I call on you.
Well, it's partly a matter of being alert to opportunities. I mentioned the Foundation for Economic Freedom in Philippines. These people are so professional, and they go looking for the obstacles. They dealt with rural farmers and the Rural Bankers Association, found out why it was so hard for rural farmers to raise capital to be able to improve their land. They went out of the Manila bubble, if you will, and talked to people and found out, and they revolutionized property law in Philippines. They liberated 2.5 million families to be real owners of their land, not tenants, in effect, of the state. And then what they've done very brilliantly on the public investment or the public services, just finding out they could redefine public utility as a narrow group of things where there's restricted foreign investment, and say these others are public services, no restriction, totally open to investment and competition. This was so smart. So I think it's a question of being nimble and going and finding the opportunities and acting and not reacting to other people's agenda. I think that's where the future is. We need to set the agenda and make the bastards react to us.
Lyle?
I guess I would say maybe there's a third option, and there's a medium term. So I think as a movement, I would say the medium term, from what I see in terms of the project, I think we have groups that, in a 5 to 7 year window, I think we've gotten much more strategic and much better at setting that agenda, looking for opportunities. I think on the back end of that, the really long-term investments that I think the left is actually extremely effective at. I mean, planting seeds that they know they won't see for another 20, 30 years. I feel like we've lost a little bit of that, and that requires, again, I'm not going to see the results in the next quarter, the next year, the next 10 years, and so it's hard to know if I've made the right bet. On the other side, on the immediate reaction, I think we're getting better. I think the Chilean example that Roberto highlighted is a good one. I think the response to COVID and what we saw with the COVID fund that Atlas put together and the cohorts and responding quickly to that and addressing the issues there. So I think we're getting better because those will always happen, right? We can't predict those, but I think we'll be better on the short-term emergencies if we get better on the really long-term horizons, so that the muscles, while we may not be using, are being built, so they're there when we need them.
Sure. Anybody else? Yeah, Adam.
But to say a positive example, I think one of the long-term issues that we have been constantly discussing in our movement is sound money. And we have been saying constantly that the printing press cannot go on because it's going to come to an unhappy end. And using that momentum of a 20, 30 year long explanation why sound money is important, but using the momentum of the current inflationary crisis is extremely important, because one was a long-term plan, but we are using the momentum of explaining that, okay, the European Central Bank doubled its balance sheet in the last 3 years. Why is that a problem? Same goes for the Fed here in the United States. So linking the long-term ideas to a temporary problem that suddenly arose and now everyone is talking about inflation, I think that's a crucial job that we aim to do.
Yeah, Roberto, you had a
Yes.
comment.
To that point, I think there's also a way in which we can merge the long term with the immediate term and those opportunities that we seek out. And at least from Latin America, and I think clearly from all the regions, one fundamental tenet has been simple rules for a complex world. Let me work, which has nothing to do with left or right. Once again, it's just common sense. Let me work. And to that end, long-term projects that measure, as we're trying to do with the index of bureaucracy, there's already one in Europe, one that we've been working on in Latin America through a series of partners. That goes to the heart not just of what the negative impact of bureaucratic expansion is, but it goes to the heart also of human dignity. So right now, in the post-COVID era, it is fundamental to say, hey, let me work. I'm just trying to recover and make a living. And that, I think, is a good way in which a long-term project can capitalize. We have a good example of how we can capitalize on an opportunity to be able to double down on that message.
Yeah, Ragat.
For me, I go back to what I've always said from the minute I discovered these ideas. And it goes back to we absolutely, urgently, now more than ever, have to have a monopoly of care, of what it is to care. Because we are very good, again, on the ideas. I mean, when it comes to just the intellectual argument, anyone with intellectual integrity cannot possibly push back for too long. But where we lack, I see it again and again and again, is on the monopoly of care. We definitely don't show up when it comes to that. And what I'm talking about there is this idea of reclaiming the moral high ground. We do not have the moral high ground. It is sad. So it doesn't mean that it cannot get there. I've actually been seeing us doing so much more work in the movement. I love the fact that we are going on storytelling. But I like to say, what I have seen us do a lot, though, is when we go on storytelling, we're kind of doing the type of storytelling that maybe the left was doing 20, 25 years ago. So we're behind on that. So there, I also would like to challenge us to not only reclaim the moral high ground, own the monopoly of care, but do it in a new, cutting-edge way. We cannot afford to keep being behind in terms of how we do that. That's a much longer conversation, but I really would like to make sure that some of us are focusing on that part of the argument, because you can have good ideas all you want. If people don't buy into them, it's worthless. And I would like to see more young people buying into this. This is why I'm excited, because Africa is the youngest region in the world. 75% of people are below the age of 25 years old for most of our nations. This is insane. And they're listening. They're listening. So maybe this is the place where it happens. Again, I go back to care. Care, 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 care. When the brain fights with the heart, brain always loses. It doesn't matter how right it is. So,
Tom.
A famous political scientist once put it very directly to our movement, as he said with his Brooklyn accent. He says, they'll care what you think when they think that you care.
that's right.
And if they think you don't care, they won't care what you think. And I think this is, we need to take that to heart.
Last question for the group. So is there a little inter-competition poll as opposed to, or pool, I should say, who wins the World Cup gives you as a regional center involvement the opportunity to, I don't know, carry something? I'm just curious. You're going to lose, so it doesn't matter. So, yeah. I'm just saying. It's just, it's not going to happen. But, all right. Any predictions?
I just think it's a hands down. It's advocata.
Yeah, without question.
There's just no question. These people are just awesome. What they have done is breathtaking, and I'm willing to put a lot of money on
You heard it here,
advocata.
people. You can buy a cookbook, and you can get him to bet on something.
I didn't say what currency, but it's a lot of money.
All right, we just got a couple minutes left, but in the theme of competition, we do have an important prize being awarded tonight, the Templeton Freedom Prize. So let's have a little conversation or a little thing about predictions. So Roberto, let's start with you. Who's going to win tonight?
I thought you said about the World Cup. I was going to say the Brazil.
Yeah, that's fine.
But for tonight, I'm also going to say Brazil.
Ah.
Líderes has done an amazing job. They won the Liberty Award in Mexico at the Latin America Liberty Forum, and it's one of those good examples of very creative public policy proposals that, with a lot of imagination, in the post-COVID area, they were able to convince legislators to pass a bill for private investment in market competition in sanitation. One area where, oh, no, that's got to be government because care, right? So here we have a good example precisely of what Tom was saying. So hands down, Brazil, World Cup and tonight.
All right, Magat. Who's going to win?
You're in for a big disappointment, my friend. I predict that Spain's Foro Regulación Inteligente, is going to win. They're doing the Madrid's deregulatory Big Bang. You owe me big time, Adam, because he was supposed to pick them. He picked mine. So I can't even pronounce. But anyway, they're going to win.
Well, I had to pick the Adam Smith Institute because I owe them. They paid for my master's, so I'm sorry. Jokes aside, I do think it's the Adam Smith Institute that will get the Templeton Freedom Award. They have done an amazing job in the United Kingdom when it comes to fighting back against some of the obsessive COVID regulations. They have sped up the vaccine process, so the UK became one of the first nations on the planet that vaccinated its citizens against COVID. They managed to convince the government to get us out of lockdowns earlier and out of quarantines earlier. And they have done that in an area that's not necessarily their natural habitat. Public health is not close to our view, but bringing the economic analysis and bringing some of the incentives and thinking about incentives into the conversation, they have done an amazing job in fighting back against government overreach and overregulation. So I think they will win tonight.
All right, Tom, who's going to win?
I made my view very clear. It's advocata. And the reason is, again, set the agenda. If you're just always responding to the other people, you lose. You're going to lose if you're just reacting. You need to set the agenda, and they have done a very, very good job at that. And they brought in the government and the opposition, and they said, look, it's arithmetic, and you can't argue ideologically with arithmetic. We have to do these following things, and they set the agenda for Sri Lanka. And the other point is, they're awesome.
All right, Lyle, what's your prediction?
Well, my prediction, as a swim, I like being in gold water. So, whoa, boo, yeah, okay.
Wow.
There you go.
Where's the hook?
Anyway, the Goldwater Institute in Arizona, what they've done on the licensure and worker freedom and the right to work, again, you wouldn't think that it's as big an issue in a free country, and yet there are these burdens that plague. And what I think is impressive is not only have they done it really well in Arizona, but because they've done it so well, Pelican, who I mentioned earlier, their work was based on the work of Goldwater. So they've really had this multiplier effect where they've nailed it in their state and really working with other states to scale that solution while being mindful of the local context, right? Because that matters. I can't just take exactly what worked in Arizona and try to plug it in Louisiana. They're very different states, different political cultures, but they've been really influential in doing that. So I think that, to me, when I can do it well and then I can help others do it well, that builder capacity, to me, that's prizeworthy. So.
All right, well, you're all wrong anyway. So
Okay.
I'm going to go with Stephen Anderson because he has no hair, and the Pacific Legal Foundation for the simple reason that we've already done a poor job of having Napoleons in the White House. We do not need more of them, with all due respect to the French, sort of, in the state capitals. So it's going to be PLF no matter what, even though, okay, as a guy who does tend to wear Scottish clothes, my heart may actually be with the Adam Smith Institute. But anyway, all right, we'll leave it at that. Lastly, we've got a slide to put up. Because we talked about the celebration part of what we do. We've got a lot of events coming up. Get your calendars out. Roberto, why don't you just walk right down with all the regional events we have coming up. So,
Tremendously excited that on the 23rd and 24th of March in Punta del Este, Uruguay. Uruguay has become a great new shining spot for freedom in Latin America. Come join us. We have an absolutely awesome program, and James just told me the registration starts on Monday.
all right. Agat.
Yes, ours is July 21st in Cape Town. I gave you a taste of what you're going to get on the ground, so no more excuse to not sign up. That's where we have the most fun. So you better be able to. You better sign up now.
All right, Oceana boy.
Well, I just want to say two things. One is everyone's invited. And I sometimes hear from our friends who say, oh, I didn't go because I wasn't invited. You are invited. Your friends are invited. Make sure everybody knows that. Come to these events. And if you want to, there's a German expression, to eat like God in France. Essen wie Gott in Frankreich. If you want to eat like God in Malaysia, where the food is fantastic, come to Kuala Lumpur, September 7th to 8th.
Here, here.
And if you want to drink like God, then you got to come to Prague, the amazing home of Czech beer, because we are going to have the Europe Liberty Forum in May 25th and 26th, taking place in the breathtaking, amazingly pretty city of Prague. And you have 150 Atlas partners in Europe that will be eagerly awaiting you there. So I hope you will join us from all corners of the world.
Didn't I say something about getting to liberty through our stomachs and food and cookbooks? So there you go, exactly. All right, Lyle.
Well, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere,
Oh,
right?
boy.
So, wow. Come back to New York a year from now, the 15th and 16th of November next year, and same bat time, same bat channel. We'll plan to see you here. So,
Excellent.
come.
Folks, would you give these folks a round of applause for the work that they are doing? Just a couple of housekeeping items to clean up. We are 2 o'clock. We'll begin with all the sessions that are in your app or your program. We also are going to be having, I think Tom, you and Matt Warner will be in the lobby if you want to emphasize purchase their new book, which is Development and Dignity. It's not that new, but it's, whatever. They'll be out there signing copies. Also, there's a separate thing at 2 that's not in your program, but you've seen advertisements that Reason and Grace Richardson Fund, the Center for Social Economic Research, is doing on how to get coalitions involved in international agreements on a wide variety of issues that matter to us. That'll be in the lower lobby in the Gramercy room, so that's not in your program, so please look at that. And as a reminder, tonight we have a big dinner. That means there are buses and there are schedules. Those schedules are in your app, they're in your program, all right? But if you are totally irresponsible and lazy, like government bureaucrats, there will be people to show you where to go, all right? But for Pete's sake, people, it's in your program. Pay attention. Be on time. It's a fun event, and it's on you. So with that, enjoy the rest of the afternoon, and thank you.